Bonjour les filles! Aujourd'hui, on va parler des pronoms d'objets indirects. On a déjà appris les pronoms d'objets directs comme je le mange, j'aime le manger, je l'ai mangé. Et aujourd'hui, on va parler des pronoms d'objets indirects. If you want to study these pronouns in the book, c'est à la page 204. 204. Avant de parler des pronoms d'objets indirects, il faut parler de la différence entre l'objet direct et l'objet indirect. Ça, c'est très important. Donc, premièrement, l'objet direct répond à la question qui ou quoi, ou en anglais who or what. Par exemple, il a acheté un cadeau. And we previously learned to replace un cadeau with the direct object pronoun le and put it before our helping verb since we're in the passé composé. So we would say il a acheté. Par contre, l'objet indirect répond à la question à qui ou pour qui. Et un objet indirect ne peut jamais être une chose. It can never be a thing. It's always going to be a person. To her, to me, to you, etc. Par exemple, elle m'a écrit une lettre. She wrote me a letter. So the me here is the indirect object pronoun. She wrote what? A letter. To whom? À qui? Me, moi. Elle m'a écrit une lettre. So now that we've talked about the difference between how to identify a direct object and an indirect object, asking this question, pour qui and à qui, to whom and for whom, let's now take a look at what those direct object pronouns are in French. All right, so you might notice that the first and second person, the singular and the plural, are exactly the same as the direct object pronouns, which is actually really convenient. You don't have to differentiate between a direct object pronoun and an indirect object pronoun in this case. So, for example, tu me vois, you see me, which is a direct object pronoun, sounds exactly the same thing as tu me donnes le cadeau. You give me the gift. So in both of these sentences, we have a pronoun me. But in the first sentence, it's a direct object pronoun. You see whom, me. And then in the second sentence, it's you give what? Le cadeau, the gift, to whom? Me. So in the second sentence, it's an indirect object pronoun. So even though they look exactly the same, they are in fact different pronouns. But you really don't need to differentiate between the two since they are the same. The only time that we are going to have a difference between the indirect and the direct object pronouns is in the third person, singular and plural, lui and leur, whereas before we had le, la, and les for the direct object pronouns. So first thing you might notice is that on the singular there is no differentiation between masculine and feminine, him and her. It's all just lui, lui. Which is great. So no masculine, feminine, it's awesome. And then there's just one for the plural, leur. So let's actually take a look at a couple of sentences. I'm going to give you a sentence that has a indirect object, and I want you to replace the indirect object with the indirect object pronoun. Numéro 1. Je montre ma nouvelle télévision à mon ami. I show my new TV to my friend. So take the verb show, montre, and ask the question to whom or for whom. And once you do that, à qui, pour qui, you should be able to find your indirect object pronoun. And it is, in fact, à mon ami. To whom? To my friend. And so we're going to replace it with her in English, and in French that would be lui, so this one. Je lui montre ma nouvelle télévision. So we took this singular, lui, and we put it right before the verb. So you'll notice that all of the indirect object pronouns go in the exact same place as the direct object pronouns. So in this case, we're in the present tense, so it goes right before the verb. And when we're in the past tense, we're going to put it right before the helping verb, and when we're in the futur proche, we're going to put it right before the infinitive between those two verbs. So same exact positioning as the direct object pronouns, which is great. So you don't have anything new to learn there. Let's take a look at an example in the passé composé. J'ai dit la vérité à mes amis. I told my friends the truth. Told what? The truth. So that's our direct object, la vérité. And then to whom? À mes amis. À qui? To my friends. So that's our indirect object, à mes amis. And now let's replace it with a indirect object pronoun. Je leur ai dit la vérité. This time our indirect object was plural, mes amis, so we used leur. Je leur ai dit la vérité. Where in the passé composé, it goes before the helping verb, just like we did with our direct object pronouns. Now you'll notice here that even though this is plural and feminine, and we're in the passé composé, we are not making agreement. So hooray for that. With indirect object pronouns, there is no agreement going on in the passé composé, none at all. Whereas if you'll recall, with the direct object pronouns, we did, where we had to put the E or the ES or the S on the end of the past participle. So write that in your notes, no agreement with indirect object pronouns. Okay, so here's just a couple of examples of some verbs that you know that take indirect objects and indirect object pronouns. They often are followed by a. For example, téléphoner à, to call someone. In English, we use a direct object here, mais en français, téléphoner à quelqu'un. Par exemple, j'ai téléphoné à ma mère. So, à ma mère is our indirect object, and if we wanted to replace that with an indirect object pronoun, it would be lui. And since we are in the passé composé here, it's going to go right before our helping verb est. So, je lui ai téléphoné. And again, quick reminder, you do not make agreement in the passé composé with indirect object pronouns. So, no i on the end of téléphoner, just je lui ai téléphoné. A couple of other verbs. We have répondre à, to answer. Rendre visite à, which is, remember, to visit a person. So, je lui ai rendu visite. I visited him or I visited her. Without context here, we're not sure whether it's him or her. Montrer à, to show, which we saw in a quiz the other day, actually. It's a regular ER verb, to show to. Demander à, to ask or to request. Parler à, to speak to. Poser une question à. You see this a lot of times in French class, to ask a question. For example, tu me poses une question. You ask me a question. And then we have obéir à, which was one of those IR verbs that we learned. For example, j'obéis à ma mère. And then replacing that à ma mère with an indirect object pronoun, je lui obéis. I obey my mother, and then I obey her. Et finalement, donner à. This is one of the most common verbs that takes an indirect object. Give something to someone. Par exemple, je vais donner un cadeau à mon ami. Here we're switching up the tense. We're using the futur proche. I'm going to give a gift to my friend. Un cadeau is our direct object. Give what? A gift. And then to whom or for whom? À qui ou pour qui? À mon ami, to my friend. So to my friend is what we are going to replace right now. And we're going to replace it with lui. Je vais lui donner un cadeau. I'm going to give her a gift. So as with our direct object pronouns, it's just more succinct and easier to say and less wordy. So these indirect object pronouns really will come in handy once you get used to using them. Okay, so now it's your turn to do some more. I have 6 sentences here, and I've actually already identified the indirect object for you, but definitely read through the sentence, make sure you understand it, and make sure you understand how we arrived at identifying the indirect object. And then you're going to take that bolded indirect object, replace it with the correct pronoun, indirect object pronoun, figure out what your tense is, and then put that pronoun in the correct spot. So rewrite the sentence using an indirect object pronoun. So go ahead and pause your video, and I will give you the answers in just a second. Okay, so here are the answers. Let's read through them really quickly. Numéro 1, j'ai répondu à ma mère. I answered my mother. So we're replacing à ma mère with lui. We're in the passé composé, so je lui ai répondu. Numéro 2, il a téléphoné à sa copine. He called his girlfriend. Again, replacing with lui because it's singular, just one girlfriend. Il lui a téléphoné. Passé composé goes before the helping verb. So identifying the tense is really important here, just like it was with our direct object pronouns. Numéro 3, nous avons rendu visite à nos grands-parents. And then à nos grands-parents, I have made a mistake. Okay, there's an error in here. This should not be lui. It's grands-parents, which is plural, so it should be leur. Let's fix that answer. Nous leur avons rendu visite. Let's see if I have any other mistakes in here. Numéro 4, je donne une fourchette à Marie. We're in the present tense here, so just je lui donne une fourchette. Numéro 5, ils ne vont pas poser une question au prof. All right, a little bit more complicated. We're in the future proche here, and we have negation. But in the future proche, the pronoun always goes directly before the infinitive. So in this case, it's going to go outside the negation. So, ils ne vont pas lui poser une question. Et numéro 6, tu racontes l'histoire à ta fille. Tu lui racontes l'histoire. Again, we're in the present tense, so lui, replacing à ta fille, simply goes directly before the verb. So you are telling a story to your daughter. You are telling her a story. Okay, so this time I want you to answer these questions. Each question has an indirect object in it. And so first you need to identify that indirect object, and then when you answer, replace the indirect object with a pronoun and put it in the correct spot. Be careful. These are in a couple of different tenses. Most of these are in the passé composé, but there's at least one that's in the present. So be careful about tense and when you're answering the question and replacing your indirect object with a pronoun. So go ahead and pause and answer those in your notes, and then I'll give you the answers. Okay, voilà les réponses. And let's go through them. Numéro 1. As-tu écrit la lettre à ta sœur? Oui, je lui ai écrit une lettre. So, à ta sœur was our indirect object, and we replaced it with lui and put it right before our helping verb est. Je lui ai écrit une lettre. Numéro 2. Obéit-il toujours à sa mère? Does he always obey his mother? So, à sa mère was our indirect object, and we replaced it with lui. We're in the present tense, so oui, il lui obéit toujours, directly before the verb. Numéro 3. As-tu répondu au professeur? Oui, je lui ai répondu. So, au professeur is what we're replacing, and we're putting it directly before our helping verb. We're in the passé composé here. Numéro 4. As-tu envoyé la carte postale à ta copine? Did you send the postcard to your girlfriend? Oui, je lui ai envoyé la carte postale. So we are replacing à ta copine with lui, and we're putting it directly before a helping verb. So je lui ai envoyé la carte postale. Et numéro 5, tu m'as donné la lettre. This one's a little bit different. It already has an indirect object pronoun in it. Did you give me the letter? So all we have to do, just like we did with the direct objects, was replace me with te. So, oui, je t'ai donné la lettre. And that's it. And most of these, except for number 2, are in the past tense. And remember, with the indirect object pronouns in the past tense, you do not need to make agreement. So even if it was a girl or if it's plural, just don't add anything to the past participle. Okay, et la fin, that covers it. That's pretty much it. We're going to do some more practice with this in class next time, so be sure to bring your notes and all of your questions that you have come up with after watching this video, and we'll talk more about it in class next time. Au revoir!